Could you please be seated so that we can initiate the keynote speaker? Welcome back, everyone. Now, please let me welcome Mr. Ünal Seven, economist, Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey, to the stage to give his keynote speech. He's going to be our second keynote speaker. Mr. Seven, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I hope you had a chance for some sightseeing in the beautiful city of Istanbul. I am Ünal Seven from the Central Bank of Turkey and working as an economist at the Structural Economic Research Department. I would like to start with thanking the colleagues at the Turkish Capital Market Association for organizing such a great forum and inviting me to give a talk on very hot topic of recent years. Unfortunately, I am not going to talk about the Turkish economic outlook, but fortunately, Mr. Kaymaz made a presentation about the Turkish economy, like brief presentation on Turkish economy in the morning session. Here today, I am happy to share my views on financial sector development and its role on economic growth, income inequality, and poverty by differentiating between banking sector and capital markets. While providing you a brief overview on the developments, I will also highlight some of the key results on my research on the issue, which may also be an interest to the participants from academic backgrounds. Let's start with GDP trends in the world, and specifically across the EU regions, since GDP growth is assumed to be the ultimate goal for policymakers. The first graph presents the GDP trends across the world, East Asia and Pacific regions, South Asia and Turkey. I intentionally focus on this group of regions, and it's easy to guess why. Most of the participants are from this group of countries, and of course Turkey has to be there. So what we see here is that world sample and East Asia Pacific sample have a similar trend, even though East Asia and Pacific was negatively affected from the Asian crisis of 1998. And for the blue one is South Asia, and the red one is East Asia Pacific region. And we see that although there is a big level difference between these two regions, after the global financial crisis, there is a chance of like convergence in terms of GDP. For Turkey, the story is a bit different. Even though Turkey is growing, but we see Turkey as a relatively high volatile trend in GDP. Also, I mean, this volatility is something like a common issue in Turkey. But we are not going to discuss the consequence of this volatility, but I believe that this deserves much more attention and also deep analysis, this volatility in Turkish economy. So if you want to see the growth performance of these regions, we can set the initial level of GDP to 100 and see how much each region increase its GDP over the period. So, for example, in this graph, we set the initial GDP of world, like in 1960s to 100, and we see that over the 50, 60 years, it increased to approximately 6,000, which means 60 times the initial level. This number is around 160 for East Asia and Pacific region, and around 70 for South Asia, and for Turkey it is around 60. And it's very clear that it's very clear that in terms of GDP growth, the success of East Asia and Pacific regions has been remarkable. And keeping in mind that this region remains one of the main drivers of the global economy and accounting for almost 2/5 of the global growth. With this background, I will attempt to cover the relationship between financial sector development and growth, income inequality, and poverty in my talk, which I believe to be perhaps the most important ones for any economy as well as for policymakers. Well, financial sector is seen as performing critical functions in facilitating economic growth, and both directly through broadening access to finance and indirectly through growth, contributing to reductions in inequality and poverty. As you all may know, economic growth, income inequality, and poverty are among the 17 SDGs. As Mr. Keller mentioned in the opening remarks, Asia Securities Forum signed a declaration on the commitment of SDGs, I think, in 2018. So the number one SDG is the no poverty, which makes a strong reference to financial inclusion, and the number 8 is the decent work on economic growth, which lays out 2 targets: one related to the encouraging the formalization of growth of micro, medium, and small-size enterprises, and the second aim refers to improving the capacity of domestic financial institutions to expand the access to banking sector, insurance, and etc. So the number 10 is referring to reduce inequalities. In that respect, we may ask the question whether financial development reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. Well, theory provides conflicting predictions about the impacts on finance, on inequality and poverty. However, its impact on economic growth has been well studied and well defined by the literature. In this talk, I will try to shed some light on the issue by presenting you a cross-country evidences and some econometric-based results. And this is the outline. I will start by summarizing the financial development trends across the world, and then distinguish between bank development and capital market development, and focusing on the relationship with growth, inequality, and poverty. At the end, I will mention some issues on alternative financing methods like crowdfunding, venture capital, and etc. So let's start with the financial sector development. There is no need to further elaborate that financial sector and intermediaries play critical functions in global and domestic economies, and also in global economies. So the main role of a financial sector in any economy is to improve the efficiency of capital allocation, to encourage savings, hence boosting economic growth, and leading to further capital formation, and leading to mobilization of savings and the facilitation of transactions. When financial markets and institutions work well, in other words, when they perform their critical functions effectively, they provide opportunities for all market participants to take the advantage of effective investment by diverting funds from to more productive use. Therefore, it may be expected that this framework will also help to reduce poverty and inequality. That is what is suggested by the literature. So, how to measure financial development, or what we mean by financial development? Actually, I follow the literature, academic literature, and we distinguish between banking sector and capital markets. In other words, stock markets. I mostly focus on stock markets. I will explain why. So, for banking development, there are several indicators to measure the level of bank development, such as liquid liabilities to GDP ratio, total bank assets to GDP, or bank interest rate margin. However, private credit to GDP ratio is most widely used one, mostly because we have more comprehensive data for across countries and for a long period of time. Here we plot the bank development level in the world sample and also in the East Asia Pacific sample. We see that till the Asian crisis, they both have a similar trend, even though there is of course, there is a level difference. But after the Asian crisis, as expected, East Asia and Pacific region was very much negatively affected from this crisis. And the gap between these two regions got closed during the financial crisis, global financial crisis of 2008. And after that, after this period, East Asia started to outperform the world average. Within Asia, we see that there is a strong negative correlation between East Asia, Pacific, and South Asia. And we see that South Asia was not affected from the Asian crisis in 1988. But after the global financial crisis, there is no such improvement in the bank development level in South Asia. And same story for East Asia. The current level is far below the pre-crisis period. In terms of capital market development, again there are several indicators which are used by the literature and also by the international organizations like World Bank, IMF, and these institutions. For example, stock market capitalization to GDP ratio, market turnover, what else? Traded value to GDP ratio. Of course, there are other pillars of financial system like derivative markets, insurance markets, and also bond markets, but we don't have enough data to make country comparison for a long period of time. So that's why we must focus on bank development and stock market development. So here I prefer to focus on stock market traded value to GDP ratio, but we will have this this very similar picture if we have used market cap to GDP or other measures, because there is a high correlation between these indicators. So here we see that world sample and East Asia Pacific sample had a similar pattern till the global financial crisis. After that period, East Asia started to outperform the world average. For the Asian regions, of course, we don't have data for South Asia before the 2000s, but this data shows a different story than the bank development level. What is that? It seems that South Asia was very much negatively affected from the global financial crisis, but it was not the case for bank development. But this is expected because, especially in emerging economies, stock markets are more open to global shocks than the banking sector. What about Turkey? So the black one on the left hand is Turkey, like bank credit to GDP ratio. We see that although there is a big level difference between East Asia and Turkey, Turkish performance has been remarkable actually. Like after 2000s, Turkey experienced a great performance in bank private credit GDP. Actually, this has been the main driver of our GDP growth. So, I mean, if we look at the GDP trend, we also see similar, not as much as this one, but we see a similar trend in GDP. On the right-hand side, we see stock market traded value to GDP for Turkey and East Asia, but for Turkey, we don't see such success in stock market. So, it is volatile, but at the same time, there is no big jump or improvement after 2000s in terms of GDP, in terms of GDP terms. So this can be, if you are an optimist person, then you can say, okay, this is a potential. If you are a pessimist, then you can, okay, the stock market is not doing well, or there is no return expectation in the market. But what I see is it's kind of potential for our stock market performance in the future. When we compare Turkey with South Asia, in terms of bank development, we see that they have similar levels. But after the global financial crisis, Turkey started to outperform South Asia region. On the right hand, we see data for stock market traded value, and I mean they have a correlation, and I mean it's not a causality, but it's this correlation, and the level is almost same for both regions. Now we move to bank development and its relation or its impact on growth, inequality, and poverty issues. So here I want to share some like similar data, but for different group of economies. I mean, because most of the participants are from the Asian countries. I want to focus on that, but at the same time, to make a good comparison, I want to emphasize some advanced and emerging situation in this country. So the yellow one is representing advanced countries, and you can see which countries are included here. And the blue one is emerging economies, excluding Turkey, and the red one is Turkey. So here we see that after the global financial crisis, there is a clear indication of convergence in banking development. Advanced economies negatively affected, and it's like far below the pre-crisis levels. But for Turkey, it's not the case. So Turkish numbers for bank credits to GDP ratio is still improving, and it's like this data till 2016, but we have similar trends with the recent data. Here what we do is we plot bank development against GDP per capita. So on the vertical axis we have GDP per capita growth for each country, which is average for this period, like 1960s to 2017. So I take the average of GDP per capita growth for each country. On the horizontal line, we have a private credit GDP ratio, again for each country. So when we plot this, we see there is a clear and strong and positive relationship between these two indicators, which means that countries with high private credit GDP ratio have a high GDP growth. Turkey is highlighted with red square here, by the way. So if we string our sample to the Asian Securities Forum member countries, so we still see a similar trend and strong trend here. China is outperforming here because, I mean, everyone knows about the Chinese remarkable growth, economic growth performance here, but they have this, very developed financial markets too. For bank development and income inequality relationship, again for the world sample, we see there is a negative relationship. By the way, just keep in mind that we are not looking for causalities in this graph, just showing like simple correlation or relationship between these variables. But for the research part, I will show some causalities too. Here we see negative relationship, which means that countries with high private credit to GDP ratio experience low level of income inequality, which is measured by Gini coefficient here. For the SF countries, okay, we cannot say that, okay, there is a negative relationship, but we can't say that this is significant or strong. This is mostly because of the heterogeneity of these countries, and also income inequality is a different concept than the economic growth. So we expect negative relationship here, but for the ESF countries, it doesn't seem so strong. For poverty reduction, contrary to the income inequality, for poverty reduction, we have a strong and negative relationship, means that countries with high credit to GDP ratio experience lower poverty gap, means lower poverty. And this relationship is very strong, by the way. Again, for the ESF sample, we still have negative correlation, but it's not, again, so strong. Because China and I think it's Vietnam, maybe Vietnamese, so they are outperforming here again. But okay, this relationship is not that strong, so it needs some econometric analysis. So to update, we see that for bank development, countries with high GDP per capita level, or in other words, with high bank development level, experience high economic growth, low income inequality, and low poverty rate. Now, let's move to capital market development trends and its relationship with these variables. For capital market, here I start with the stock market capitalization trends, again for the same sample, advanced, emerging, and Turkey samples. Here we see that for Turkey, first of all, we see again different picture than the banking development. There is a divergence actually. So after global financial crisis, not just because of the global financial crisis, of course, because after within this period, Turkey had some other problems like terrorist attacks and some political issues. So stock markets are generally, affected from this kind of instabilities. But for advanced economies, we see that the current levels are far below the pre-crisis period. So they are not recovered yet, actually. For emerging economies, so like including Russia, China, India, Thailand, Malaysia. So I mean they were not so much negatively affected, but I mean the trend is they have a positive trend, by the way. So for Turkey, this can be this divergence is a sign of that we have to be careful about measuring our risk. But at the same time, if you believe the future of the country or the future of the Turkish economy, so that means it contains some potential. I mean, turning a negative trend from negative trend to positive trend. I mean, it's just about your perception on Turkish economy. So here again we plot stock market traded value to GDP ratio and GDP per capita growth for the same group of countries for the same year, and we see the relationship is positive, but it doesn't seem so strong, or maybe it's not so significant. Here we see that countries with high level of capital market development have a high level of GDP per capita growth. Again, striking our sample to ESF sample, we see that this time the relationship is even stronger and positive. So here, China, Singapore, Hong Kong, they are like outperforming because they have like developed financial system, but their GDP growth are also doing good. So this maybe this relation is stronger than the world sample, by the way. So maybe it deserves more research on why this is the case in these countries, but in my opinion, it's about their developed financial system. For income inequality and capital market development trend, we still have a negative relationship, and here we again measure income inequality with a Gini coefficient. As I say before, I mean, you may ask the question why you use stock market traded value to GDP ratio. It might not be a good indicator, but as I said, I mean, which variable you use, I mean, in terms of capital market development, you will get with the same results because there is a high correlation between these two variables. It's just because of like having more data for more number of countries. For the ESF sample, we still have negative relationship, but Malaysia and China again are kind of outliers here. And Korea has very low level of income inequality, but at the same time having development financial capital market. For poverty reduction, we see a similar pattern as in the case for bank development and poverty reduction relationship. And Turkey is again the red one. And here we see that the country like here having the most developed, I don't know which country is that, I have to check, but country with most developed capital market has the lowest poverty gap for this sample. So if you take another like time period after 1980s, maybe you would get a different result. But I just use the largest sample that I have data. So there is no, I mean, because the World Bank data starts from 1960, so this is the reason. But if you just look at the period after the global financial crisis, you will have different story. But I mean, my point is that take the latest, largest available data and then see the picture. For the ESF sample, we can't say there is a strong relationship, but just to show the fitted line. But India, China are the outliers here, and Iran also in the negative performance outlier. So if we take, instead of stock market traded value, if we take stock market turnover ratio, which is another indicator for measuring the level of development, here we see, again, on the left side, we see a stock market turnover ratio against poverty gap, and we see there is a clear and negative relationship. On the right-hand side, we have stock market turnover ratio against income share of the poorest 10%. So it's a measure of inequality. So here we have a positive relationship, which means that countries with more developed capital markets experience high income in the poorest quantile. So like the poorest gets a high share of total income in the economy. So of course, if we are talking about capital markets and finance, saving should be there. So I plot gross saving rates against stock market traded turnover ratio here. We see that there is a positive relationship between these two indicators. Singapore, China, maybe New Zealand are outliers. Again, the same story. Gross saving rates are so high in these countries, and they also have developed financial system. But I mean, this graph doesn't tell you that these countries have a high saving rate because they have a well-developed financial system. I mean, this graph doesn't show that, but it's just that there is a positive correlation. But we need more research on that. We need to find the direction of the causality. Whether it is coming from saving, you have more savings, and because of that, you invest in the market, so you have developed financial sector. Otherwise, in the other way around, you have a developed financial sector or capital market, and people are saving because the return is good in the market, so people save, or the firms, the government save, and then at the end you end up with high saving rate. So this needs more research, econometric research to be easily and fully understand. So for capital market development, we end up with the similar results with the bank development here. Again, we see that countries with a high level of capital market development or stock market development have high economic growth, low income inequality, low poverty rate, and high income share of the poor. However, as you remember from the figures, the relationship is not that much strong and significant, maybe significant for the ESF countries. Now let's move to some econometric-based results. So forgive me if these tables are not so familiar to you, but here we have regression results for a world sample of 152 countries for the last 3 decades. So here, bank aggregate is a composite index of the 6 variables that I mentioned before. So not just focusing on the private credit to GDP ratio, but also I take like 7 indicators and then make a composite index. and then measure the level of bank development with this index. So here what we see that, by the way, here we divide our sample to different income groups, like high income countries, middle income countries, and low income countries, and then see how the relationship between bank development and growth differs across these income groups. So what we see is here, the relationship is negative for high income countries. So which means that in high income countries, more finance is not good in terms of credit. This might be due to the global financial crisis, like mortgage crisis. And as you remember, there was a graph showing the bank credit level in advanced economies. So there was a negative trend. But for middle income and low income countries, we see significant and positive relationship. So it means that bank development in middle income and low income countries promote growth. So now here we can talk about causality. So it means that if in a country that if a country increases bank private credit to GDP ratio in this year, then they will have more growth in the next year or the next period. But for high income countries, we can't say the same direction. Actually, this is an ongoing debate on the literature too. I mean, these different income group countries and the impact of credit on growth. And there are some studies that found the same result with my research, that negative relationship in high income countries, and World Bank has some research too. And they say that more finance is not good, is not always good actually for advanced economies. Because the system, financial system becomes so sophisticated. You know, if you have a very developed financial system, it means that sophistication is there, like derivative markets, mortgage space, ABS, CDS. So, but people don't understand the concept. So, because of that, it harms the economy or the poor. So, that is one of the explanation by the literature. The same sample, and here we look for the stock market development and growth relationship. Here we don't have low-income countries because they don't either have stock markets or not available data here for the stock market development. But here we see that both relationships are positive. So countries, like, let's say in middle-income countries, if stock market turnover ratio or market cap to GDP ratio increases, then GDP increases. So the direction is coming from the stock market, capital market to economic growth. Here in this table we have a different sample. This sample focuses on emerging economies, only emerging economies, like 45 emerging economies for the period 1995 to 2015. Market aggregate is again a composite index of 3 different indicators of capital market development. And here what we see is that although the relationship is negative, it's not significant in all specifications, like in GMM estimations and OLS estimations. So the relationship is not significant, which means that we don't find a significant relationship between capital market development and income inequality, which is measured by the Gini coefficient. You might remember from the figures that from the world sample, the relationship was not so strong. Again, for the same emerging economy sample, now we regress poverty rate against poverty rates against market aggregate, which is called like capital market development indicator. Here, what we see, the relationship is positive and statistically significant. So, which means that capital market development reduces poverty in this group of countries. So like I think most of the ESF countries and Turkey are included in this sample, if I am not mistaken. So in these countries, if you have more developed capital market, then you have less poverty. Till now, we have already talked about the bank and stock market originated instruments. That is unfortunately the main part of the financial system in many emerging economies. However, we perhaps need more thoughts, talks, or work on alternative financial instruments. Yet there is not much reliable data on this front, especially cross-country data, which can be quite useful for us to fully understand the efficiency or success of these new financing instruments. So I want to start with this graph, which shows the financing channels by firm size or by firm age. So here we see that young firms rely on grants, family and friends, or crowdfunding as a major source of finance. But in the expansion or growth period, they rely on, they use banks, venture capitals, and private equities. When firms get mature, when they grow up, so they mostly use IPOs and listing in the stock market. So, and also we should note that I mean, this line shows the data availability. In other words, information asymmetry. So here we see that when firms are young or at the startup period, information asymmetry is so high, but when they get mature, we have relatively less information asymmetry. So this graph or this picture shows the importance of financing firm for the different financing methods for firms at the different level of stage of development. So if you are a startup, you should not look for like IPOs or listing in the capital markets, but I mean, or the policymakers should design something like crowdfunding or venture capital issues for startup firms. But banks also are not giving financing the startups, because banks are just looking at the projects and then they evaluate your risk with project, but you are a startup, so they don't finance you. So actually in Turkey also there are some policy actions taken for this issue, I will mention now. But as a policymaker, so we have to focus on this firm age and financing relationship, and then develop some financing methods for each group of firms at the different age or size. So reliance on the on bank-based finance has limits, and especially after the global financial crisis, firm leverage significantly increased. Not only in Turkey, but also in most of the emerging countries, firm leverage increased. So this calls a need for alternative financing methods, especially in equity-based finance. New sources of finance for especially high-growth SMEs can be listed as venture capital, angel investment, crowdfunding, a public listing in terms of like capital and money markets, international funds, for example, EU funds, World Bank, EBRD funds. Especially these institutions are operating mostly in emerging economies, and also they are very active in Turkey too. And governmental resources, maybe in terms of grants. So, however, these resources are in an early stage of development in most of the countries. Many countries have not even adopted necessary policies to regulate these instruments, but we see a global effort for developing this kind of financing methods across the world. And Turkey, as I said, has already taken policy actions since 2013, and Turkey recently made a regulation on crowdfunding, and which allows debt-based crowdfunding, which makes it possible for individual investors. So like I think at the beginning of last month, we made a regulation on that. Now I want to share some data, recent data, or let's say available data on angel investment and venture capital. So this data is from 2017. And actually, it's not easy to find reliable data on these issues, as I said before. I mean, we don't have cross-country data, just following some websites on this venture capital. And then we collect the data. Here we see that in terms of raising funds in angel investment and venture capital investment, USA is the leading country. They raised around $115 billion by 2017. And China is the first follower, and they raised $93 billion. India, UK, and Germany are following this country. So these are the top 5 in 2017. For crowdfunding, here China is the leading country. Actually, by 2018, China raised $170 billion in crowdfunding. So it's a great money. I mean, considering the Turkish GDP is like around $800 billion, 170 is a huge money for crowdfunding. USA, I mean, you see the difference. China raised 170, and USA raised $10 billion, almost 17 times. For the UK, it is like 3.20, and Italy, France, Germany, Russia, Canada, and Turkey are the following. I mean, these are not, by the way, sorted by amount, so it's like randomly chosen. And for Turkey, it is like around $45 million for crowdfunding by 2018. But with these regulations, which is like authorized by the Capital Markets Board of Turkey recently, and we believe there is a big potential in this area in Turkey. So here we see that most of the funds raised are using the debt-based equity finance, debt-based financing. At the same time, equity financing is also very common in most of the countries. So to conclude, I mean, maybe I repeat this many times and I have to repeat again. Financial sectors perform critical functions in domestic and global economies, no doubt. Cross-country data shows that countries with high bank development level have higher economic growth, low income inequality, and low poverty rate. And we also find similar results for capital market development trends too. But the relationship is not that much strong. Secondly, for academic researchers show that in low and middle income countries, bank development increases economic growth, but it's not the case for high income countries. For stock market development, we see that countries with high stock market development experience higher economic growth, which is the case for middle and high income countries. However, the impact of financial development on, we see that the relationship between bank development and growth, on overall, if you say financial development and growth, is well studied by the literature. Maybe it has been on the agenda maybe last 20, 25 years, and the research are almost robust for now. But for the finance inequality poverty relationship, we need more research on that. Actually, we need micro data to understand this framework, because growth and inequality poverty are some of different concepts. I mean, they are very important, of course, for socioeconomic reason, macro reason, micro. They are for politicians too, but they are different concepts, like social issues mostly. So More micro-based research is needed to fully understand the relationship between financial sector development and income inequality and poverty. So the last one is about this alternative financing methods. So we see that backed by technological advancements and more common use of the internet, alternative financing methods are improving and expanding at an increasing pace. Accordingly, construction of reliable data source will be beneficial to develop timely policies to expand or to increase funds or the use of these methods across firms or also for investors too. So expansion of these methods is important in terms of their contribution to financial intermediation and also their potential in providing high quality external financing. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience?
That was an excellent speech. Thank you very, very much for giving that speech. I guess my question is that in looking at Turkey, I've been here 3 times, and what I have seen and it's sort of a longer perspective, but really since the early 2000s, there has been tremendous development structurally, particularly in the financial markets. Mm-hmm. Really been impressed with the sophistication in the markets. And my Turkish colleagues have given me a lot of background information on that, so it's quite impressed, to the point where really the Turkish capital markets have the potential for really being the center of Middle East capital. And over and above that, I flew into your airport last night and was tremendously impressed with the airport, the infrastructure. So it just seems to me that there is tremendous potential in Turkey from an economic perspective. Yes, Europe is going to grow slowly, and it's an important market, but it's also got close proximity to the Far East. So I would think the potential would be very strong. It seems that the one handicap, and it was reflected in your colleague's slide this morning, is, or not reflected the way I thought it might have been, but there was a very substantial depreciation in the Turkish lira in 2019, which really, and a real slowing in the stock market performance. I mean, it came out of the 2008 crash, outperforming every stock exchange, which you would expect because of the potential in Turkey. And then it rolled over with the depreciation in the lira, and it was more about a loss of foreign confidence. So I guess my question to you is, it seems to me if foreign confidence in the Turkish economy can be restored, and maybe it is being restored, that everything points very positively to the Turkish economy. So I'd like your comment on that. And the thing related to that I couldn't understand in your colleague's slide is, with a very substantial depreciation in the lira, I would have thought that the currency, I would have thought that inflation would have grown at a much, much faster rate than what was portrayed in the figure, the average of 2%. So those are my 2 questions.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. Actually, as I remember this figure in the morning session, so there was you see that inflation was so stable over the last few years, because there's a baggage on the scale actually, because we had like a very high level of inflation prior to 2000s, like around 50% of inflation, 60% of inflation. But after 2000s, like starting from the 2003-4, we did very good on inflation, reducing inflation. It's mostly because of these FDIs and the appreciation of Turkish liras too. So last year, because of the currency shock, and we had a big jump in inflation. I think it was like the highest number was around 25%, like 6 months ago or something. But nowadays, today, the latest inflation was announced, and it was around 8.3 something. So we reduced a lot. But in Turkey, this inflation is, okay, we have some structural problem with the inflation rate. So we have a structural inflation rate. It's something around 3.5 something. There are some research on that. So we say that in Turkey, there is a structural inflation problem, which is around 4%, 5%. But the issue is that, Turkish economy is generally gets affected from the currency depreciation because, okay, we are exporting a lot. I mean, this depreciation increase our export, but import share of our export is so high. So we import, like it is, I think, I don't remember the latest data, but it was around 60% something. So import share of export. So if you import something and your currency depreciates, so it means that, I mean, you are not taking the full advantage of this depreciation in your currency. However, we recover very fast from this crisis. Actually, I mean, we had like 2 consecutive negative growth, like for 2 quarters. But last 2 quarters we have been growing. The economy is growing. So I think we are recovering actually. And for potential, also Mr. Taymaz made like a great presentation on the potential of Turkish economy. I agree with all his suggestions, and I mean, considering the demography of Turkey, strategic location of Turkey, and like human capital of Turkey, this is also another issue. So like we invest a lot on education and these things, and the number of researchers are increasing in the country. So in terms of human capital, which is very important for implementing R&Ds and adoption of technology. So and maybe some of you are following the recent updates on Turkish economy that since we have like, I mean, not only Turkey, but most of the emerging countries have like trouble with external financing because of the Fed policy. So now we have to use, I mean, we have to become an economist, all of us, and then try to allocate our resources effectively. Now Turkey is doing this recently. So collaborating with banking sector and trying to finance more productive firms, by the way. So I mean, this has been the latest policy agenda for the government and also for the private sector. So so what we are trying to do, just pick up the productive firms, productive sectors or strategic sectors and finance them. So as you mentioned, we have like very great investment in infrastructure, and we did a lot. I mean, most of our GDP growth came from growth in construction sector, but now we have to be more careful about diverting funds or allocation of funds which is limited. I mean, we are based on like financial resources because of the global conditions. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. Thank you. Please.
It was a very nice presentation. My 2 simple questions were, one, what I've observed in the earlier morning presentation and your presentation is that over a period of time, the inflation in the economy is around 15 to 16%, the interest rates are around 20%. So does it mean that basically the cost of living is very high? That is question number 1. And second, you mentioned Gini coefficient, which basically measures the income inequality part. So if the Gini coefficient is rising and if the central banks keeps on raising interest rates, then what is the amount of net savings the people would be having? Or is it that basically they are earning and spending everything, and then again there is a fiscal deficit on the part of government, and in the net savings of the people is not taking place? So these 2, if you can just clarify. Thank you.
As a central banker, maybe it's not a good idea to answer this question, but as an academician, I mean, I will try to answer. Okay, as I mentioned, we had a period of high inflation rates, but last 15 years, we had relatively low inflation rate period, so it was around, it was one digit for a long period of time. At that time, as you said, the purchasing power of Turkish people increased a lot. Due to last year currency shocks, of course, inflation went up, and living became expensive for, especially for the poor people. Yeah, that's true. I hope this inflation rate will not survive. At least it will go down. And now we see. There is there is a remarkable decline in the inflation rate. For Gini coefficient, if I am not mistaken, over the last 15 years, there was no big difference in the Gini coefficient of Turkey. It was around 0.40. I think the best time was around, before the global financial crisis, it was around like 0.38. Now it is around 0.40. Yeah, during this crisis, mostly the poor people are affected because of the high inflation. So we are trying to solve this problem, the whole country. Okay. Any other question?
Thank you very much, and your presentation was excellent. The data speaks for itself in many ways and covered very important points. Just two questions. One is, you looked very much at the development of the banking system and then also the development of the capital market system alongside that. And just wondered if you had any comments about the interaction of those two systems as they evolve over time, because it's an aspect which is important, and but also leads into a question about pricing, which is where my second question is. One of the ways that, for example, the markets can assist banking is providing benchmark rates, and we've had some discussion about that today, where benchmark rates exist and are provided by financial markets can lead to basically more efficient banking outcomes. But in the current context, I did have a question about, with the drive now towards negative interest rates in many jurisdictions, that seems to me to be the opposite of financial development. You look through the literature over the years, generally speaking, a financial system that's working has a positive, at least a positive real interest rate. So now the latter question might be a bit of a sensitive one, so if you want to concentrate on the former about the connectivity between the banking system and markets, that would be fine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a difficult question, first of all. It's strange that some countries are fighting against inflation, like us, but some countries are promoting inflation, like European countries and the US. So not having a high inflation is a problem in these countries, but for emerging countries like us, having inflation is a problem. This is just because of the level of economic development, I think, also for living standards. In emerging countries, having a high inflation, of course, it's about being open to shocks, global shocks. First of all, it's a main driver. In Turkey, also in most of the emerging economies, the financial system is mostly bank-based. Like maybe more than 90% of financial system is composed of banking sector, and capital markets are not developed, or either concentration is so. Also in Turkey, when we look at the concentration rate in the banking sector, like in terms of credit, we see that very limited number of firms are getting credit. So, and also at the bank, we have been working on this issue, to understand the dynamics of, let's say, business dynamism in Turkey. And then we see that after the global financial crisis, or starting from 2013, you remember the time that Fed announced the tapering, there is a decline trend in business dynamism in Turkey. So what happens? A small number of firms are getting credit, finding finance. most of them are in terms of US dollars, foreign currency, because foreign currency credit or finance is generally used for long-term investment. In Turkey also big firms are doing more investment. Because of that, the research shows that it marks up, which in other terms, which means that inflation, the prices going up. So if the other firms or the competitors had a chance of getting credit or finance using banking sector or capital markets or other sources, so then it would increase the competition in the economy, and then would maybe make it difficult, even more difficult, to have to allow prices to go up. So that is one of the main issue in our economy. So markups are going up, concentration is so high, and not every firm is getting credit easily. I mean, this is not the fault of banking sector, of course, but we need to develop this alternative way of financing, especially for young firms. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? None. Thank you so much, Mr. Seven, for a very thorough presentation and an expert elaboration on the macroeconomic figures. It was really interesting. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the latest session of the day is approaching. It's going to be a follow-up session for the Bali Declaration and ASF SDG survey by Mr. Koichi Isakura and Ms. Keiko Nakada from JSDA. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Now is the time for our magical words, SDGs. It is our great pleasure to have the opportunity to report here on the progress of our works at the ASF to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. The ASF launched its working group for promotion of SDGs last year. Following the establishment of the working group, the ASF announced the Bali Declaration at the last AGM in Bali and committed to working for the achievement of the SDGs. As an initial work stream, the working group conducted a survey on the status of sustainable finance or ESG investment in the jurisdictions where ASF members located. The survey was responded by 16 ASF member organizations and has since been compiled and published. I'd like to ask Keiko Nakada, my colleague who played a pivotal role in compiling this survey, to brief us on the survey results as well as the ASF's future SDG-related works. Keiko, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes. Can I see my face? Okay. So thank you very much for taking time out of the busy schedule at this AGM to be part of today's follow-up session. And today I'd like to share with you the ASF's initiatives to promote the SDGs project, which was initiated by the adoption of the Bali Declaration last year. So, as you remember, the ASF adopted the Bali Declaration on promotion of SDGs at the last AGM held in Bali, November 2018. demonstrating our commitment to the achievement of the SDGs and our resolve to further the effort of ASF members in this arena. And in the spirit of this declaration, the ASF established a working group for promotion of SDGs to deliberate possible areas in which the ASF could effectively contribute to the SDGs. And now we had a 10-member organization join this working group. And I am happy to inform you that yesterday, another organization, ACIFMA, showed their intention to join this working group. So now we have 11 members in total. And as one of its first major activities, the working group decided to conduct a survey on SDGs or ESG-related matters and on the status of sustainable finance in the Asia member jurisdictions. So here I would like to provide some background for the rationale behind the survey. Firstly, although the Asia-Pacific region attains and sustains rapid economic growth and plays an invaluable role in both driving the world economy and comprising more than half of the world's population, at the same time, it houses about 52% of the world's poorest, and with rapid industrialization and changes to the social structure, and many jurisdictions face difficult social and environmental challenges. And secondly, given the strategic and economic importance of the region, addressing the region's social, economic, and environmental problems would serve as a large step for the project of global sustainability and would also greatly contribute to achievement of the SDGs, which has been set as a global goal for the international community. And third, while there is a rapid rise of ESG investment, a major area in which the financial or securities industry can effectively contribute to the SDGs, there is also a lack of comprehensive data and information about ESG financing within the Asia-Pacific region. Then it is here that the ASF working group decided to conduct a survey on SDGs or ESG-related matters and on the status of sustainable finance in the ASF member jurisdictions, with the aim to collect information on ESG investment in the region in a manner which could be compared across borders. The questionnaire was sent out to all the ASF members on December 18, 2018. And we were able to receive the responses from 15 organizations out of then 23 organizations of ASF, and which representing 14 jurisdictions with diverse geographical and economic characteristics. And also from ICMA, the leading association in the area of green and social bond market with a global reach. So we received 16 responses in total. So thank you to all of those who took time and effort to answer the questionnaire. The collected data are in principle as of the end of the year 2018. And the full text and all the additional materials are now available on the ASF website, like this, with some infographics summary, like this. And I think here, this slide shows the overall structure of the survey. And I think it is not a stretch to say that this survey represents one of the first efforts to capture the diverse ESG landscape that currently exists in Asia-Pacific region. Today, I would like to share with you the ASF colleagues and the results of the survey with some key takeaways. Okay. So, the first section of the survey intended to capture the basic regulatory and policy framework in each jurisdiction. And the most commonly introduced form of the initiative was that of standards or guidelines rather than the regulation. And here is a map, and the country with green color shows those answered yes, and the red color, those answered no. And the country with gray color are not members of ASF or who did not answer the questionnaire. So amongst the standards or guidelines were those pertaining to financial products and services such as green bonds and SRI or social responsible investment funds, as well as those pertaining to corporate governance and stewardship or investment governance codes. And also there was initiatives for Islamic finance, as a thing in the form of the SRI Skook framework. Okay. And the next section sought to collect information about the organizations active in the field of sustainable finance. And amongst the entities supporting sustainable finance, exchanges and industry associations stood out in terms of their contributions to this end. Survey results suggested that the region's exchanges were actively committed to the sustainability, with every respondent jurisdiction's exchanges being a signatory to the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiatives, or SSE, according to its report for the year 2018. And SSE is a partnership initiative with the United Nations. And industry associations in this field were not limited to securities associations like ASF members, but also included such associations as the Bankers Association, investment or fund associations, or corporate governance associations, and also responsible investment associations, and also the business associations. Then the survey also looked into the market size and the characteristics for each asset class. Let's look at the characteristics of each market. For equity market, disclosure of non-financial information or climate risks was the most commonly observed practice. For disclosure, there are some cases like sustainability reporting is made mandatory to all listed companies in Singapore Exchange, and also the top 500 market cap listed companies are required to adapt integrated reporting in India. And having said that, it is fair to say that the requirement remains partial or on a voluntary basis in most jurisdictions. And alignment with global initiatives like including TCFD, or Task Force on Climate Change Financial Disclosure, led by FSB, and other sustainability reporting initiatives, together with efforts by exchanges, might be a key to further expand such disclosure. And in addition, there existed ESG-related indexes in 9 jurisdictions. A number of such indexes were typically issued by exchanges and also by global rating agencies with a focus on specific region or jurisdiction, like MSCI, FTSE for good, or Dow Jones, S&P, etc. The indexes also have a diverse ESG focus area, such as carbon efficiency, fossil fuel-free, new energy, and corporate governance. In some jurisdictions, ETFs referred to ESG indexes also existed. Okay. Looking at the bond market, green and social bonds were issued in 13 jurisdictions as the most commonly adopted means of sustainable finance in the region. Moreover, ICMA issues the principles and guidelines of green, social, and sustainability bond, which many government principles or guidelines refer to. In addition, the ICMA publishes global database of such bonds. The ESG-related funds were also common. Various types of funds, including private equity funds, investment trust funds, pension funds, ESG investment company, were found in the region with a diversity of ESG-related themes. When we look at the result of this segment, we will find that the market sizes vary considerably depending on the stages of ESG market development in each jurisdiction. In the Asia-Pacific region, although there exists relatively advanced market, like China, which has the biggest green bond market in the world, but it can be said that the ESG markets are still developing in a number of jurisdictions. Okay. The questionnaire also included those about sustainable investors. Although such information was not available in many jurisdictions, the survey result indicated that institutional investors, such as superannuation, public or non-public pension funds, and retirement funds, or signatories to the investors' cause, which supports sustainable finance, were prominent in the region. In particular, there was a significant number of signatories to global initiatives, like as PRI, Principle of Responsible Investment, or UNEP-FI, Financial Initiatives, by fund managers or financial institutions, and as well as the UN Global Compact, signed by a number of business corporations, and which represent an awareness and commitment within the region to the goals set by such initiatives. The second section of the questionnaire was a pilot survey to grasp the broader issues related to SDGs, not limited to ESG financing. This section is expected to be further developed as found appropriate. And as a number of global stakeholders have started focusing on sustainable finance, it is our hope that this report to be utilized as a reference point of such information of the Asia-Pacific region. For example, the IOSCO GEM, Growth and Emerging Market Committee, has conducted a survey on sustainable finance using a questionnaire quite similar to the ASF SDGs survey. And recently, the IOSCO also established the Sustainable Finance Network. As a part of information dissemination, the ASF Secretariat sent a report to the IOSCO Secretariat and received a positive response. The result was also shared with the Asia Development Bank Institute and other relevant organizations. So, taking opportunity of the completion of the survey, the ASF launched a special area designated to the SDGs on the ASF website. Hopefully, this page serves as a good tool to further enhance the sharing of information amongst the ASF as a whole. We will continue to post links to relevant information and documents relating to the SDGs or ESG. In addition, we would like to periodically update and follow up on the results of the survey post-2020. And finally, and more importantly, based on the information and insight obtained from the survey, As a next step, we would like to deliberate on the common issues and focus areas of the ASF member in this field. And we will welcome any suggestions or ideas on future activities from ASF members. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Keiko. I would like to thank once again all the ASF SDGs working group members as well as members that participated in this survey for supporting this project, and appreciate in advance all of your future cooperation as we further our efforts in this field. And my special thanks goes to Mr. Mushtaq Kapasi of the ICMA, who provided invaluable advice and suggestions for this survey. Mushtaq, I would appreciate it if you could deliver some comments at this stage.
Yes, thank you very much for all your contributions to this great project. And I would also like to thank Ishikura-san for his leadership and really his vision to have this idea to have ASF come together behind the SDGs. I'll just speak for a couple of minutes with my thoughts on this project and next steps. So when Ishikura-san first approached me about this idea, and Nakata-san as well, I was actually very positive about the idea and quite excited about using this forum, ASF, to help promote the SDGs in the region and in the financial industry. And there are a couple of reasons for that, specific reasons. First of all, we at ICMA had been involved in the Green Bond Principles since 2014, which is in fact the year before the SDGs were announced by the UN. And so for quite a while, even at the beginnings of the sustainable finance trend, or the proliferation of sustainable finance, ICMA has been at the forefront helping the market to grow in that respect. And by last year, it became clear that the market was going beyond simply green bonds, beyond even simply social bonds, to really encompass sustainability as a whole. And the best measure, the best standards for sustainability were the Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, ICMA had concurrently undertaken on its own, with the support of our members in the Green Bond Principles and Social Bond Principles, to create a mapping between the product categories of the Green Bond Principles and Social Bond Principles and the SDGs themselves. So ICMA was already focused on the SDGs, and to have the ASF and Asia start to take a leadership role was very important to me. Secondly, I'd like to highlight a general trend in sustainable finance, which goes back several years. So I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm an American, and generally trade associations in the United States are not very keen to have government intervention, much less support. They look rather obliquely on a helping hand from the official sector. But it's become clear, and it became clear starting in 2015, 2016, that official sector support was essential to grow the sustainable finance market. The market used to think that it could go on alone and have bottom-up standards, bottom-up push to promote sustainable finance. But with first the example of China, then the example of the ASEAN countries, and also the example of Japan and other countries in Asia, India even, it became obvious that you need both the bottom-up support from the market as well as official sector support in various ways to support sustainable finance. And the SDGs are part of that. And I think the ASF is ideally suited as a conduit between the private sector and the official sector to help move that along. And then last but not least, I thought it was a good opportunity for Asia to be a leader in the development of sustainable finance, as the JSDA are already a leader in the promotion of the SDGs. So as Ishikura-san mentioned, it was an enormous amount of work, and I have to say almost all of that was taken on by Nakata-san, so I have to give her a really big round of applause. And yes. really all the recognition for doing a massive, massive amount of work. I mean, we thank you for sending in your data and your information. But as you can imagine, taking all of those sets of data, making them consistent, making them readable, putting them into the correct themes, it's just hours and hours and hours of really unappreciated work, I think, until now. So I really want to give a handout to Nakata-san. I think this is very valuable in a couple of ways. First of all, it was not clear to me exactly what all the different jurisdictions in Asia were doing, Asia Pacific, and the extent to which they were all supporting the SDGs in different ways. So I think one really valuable aspect of the survey, and for those of you who haven't read it, I do recommend you skim it at least to read it. It's a fantastic reference. It's almost just like a compendium of information about the richness of different initiatives around the region to support the SDGs and sustainable finance. And I think one interesting conclusion that I drew from it is that there are many different ways in which governments, markets can support the SDGs in finance. And I think Asia is actually a great example, Asia Pacific is actually a great example of the diversity of those ways. Some can be regulation, some can be common standards from trade associations, some can be from the exchanges, some can be facilitating disclosure, some can be from the asset manager side. And we're seeing a lot of experimentation in Asia, and I think that's very promising. So in terms of next steps, I think what we've done so far is actually extremely valuable, and we've shared it with ASCO, shared it with the ADB. I think it's a very useful reference, not only for ourselves in the region, but also to demonstrate for foreign and global associations the amount of work and the creativity that's happening in the Asian private and official sectors. I think the next step, though, would be to identify some commonalities, some differences, some inconsistencies, to do a little bit more analysis on the actual data points that have been uncovered and put together in the survey, to think more strategically about, now that we have all the information, what can we actually do? Where can we be most valuable as a group among ourselves to help promote these? I was just reading in the FT today, just to close, an op-ed by Mr. Gutierrez, the UN leader, who had somewhat mixed reviews about progress of the SDGs so far, and is really pushing for finance to take a better role. And the very interesting comment, very interesting presentation from The Economist, I think it really pushes, it supports what I'm saying right now, in that the development of capital markets can do a lot, can be correlated with your social goals, but in itself, it's not clearly and obviously going to solve social problems. You actually need that to be sustainable. You need to make an extra effort on top of capital market development in order to create a sustainable society. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tak. I expect that the ASF members will continue to work together for the SDGs, an incredibly important work on the global agenda. Thank you very much.
Before you leave, if I may add something out of my MC script right now, about your project. We talked about this before, but I would like every member to hear that, if I may. I'm the former Secretary General of Federation of Eurasian Stock Exchanges, and like 6 years ago, we initiated the first project in Turkey about the SDGs with the UNDP. And since the members of FEAS cover some other Asian exchanges and institutions like Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Russia, if you'd like to enhance your database on this, just to compare it with your current information, you could definitely contact them, because they have great database and great files about all the Asian countries. Okay. So I'm sorry, I felt like I had to inform you about that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We are very positive to expand our database and seek further partners to enhance these databases.
Because we have conducted a very large survey,
Yes.
and that survey has been updated and upgraded for the past 6 years. So the information that they got about the whole Asian area is valuable information.
Okay. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the updates. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very intensive day. I can see that on everyone's faces. But we came to the end of day 1 in our forum. We hope that you found the speeches and the presentations and the reportings insightful. Before you leave, I'd like to remind you on the gala dinner tonight, which is going to be at the Four Seasons Hotel at 7 o'clock. But please be ready at the lobby at 6:30 for the transfers. And tomorrow we will begin at 9 o'clock with the panels. If you have any questions, we're still going to be around. And see you tonight. And thank you for your participation today. Thank you.